Welcome to the Flame Tree Myth and Fiction podcast. A creator god, a trickster folk hero, a wily spider, and a heroic symbol of resistance. Anansi is a fascinating figure within West African folklore. Today, we're spotlighting one story from our Myths, Gods and Immortals book on Anansi, published this year. And as this is a modern retelling of a mythological figure, we are also going to include reference to one of the original folkloric stories. So, let's begin with The Secrets of Jamestown Lighthouse by Benjamin Cyril Arthur. When I first read this story, I was immediately sucked into its world and characters. It reminds me slightly of Stephen King's It or Stranger Things, mostly because of the character dynamics. We've got a gang of kids who are sneaking around, sticking their noses into things that are way beyond their pay grade. But who can resist breaking the rules when there's an adventure at stake? So, here is The Secrets of Jamestown Lighthouse by Benjamin Cyril Arthur, read by Cheryl S and Ntumy.
Once upon a time, when the earth was still a mere empty space, Ntumy, the supreme being, created a son. He shaped his son's destiny with his mastery and made him highly intelligent. He infused his son with his divine essence, giving him a mind of his own that would eventually water its greed for more than he was given. This son, a new creation, would bridge the gap between God and humans through his divinatory and oracular wisdom. In some years to come, when the first human was created, the human would worship him and call him Atta Anansi, Father Anansi. The beam from the old lighthouse cut through the inky night like a knife, casting an eerie glow over the sea. Standing at the base of the towering structure, Salom squinted down at the tattered map clutched in his hands. He was a 16-year-old boy with curious brown eyes and an unquenching thirst for adventure. He turned the map upside down and stared at it quietly. "We're here," he announced. "We've finally found Kweku Anansi's lair." Are you sure about this?" Akosua's voice wavered beside him. "The festival is about to begin, for crying out loud. Grandma needs our help at the shrine." Gunshots and loud cheers suddenly filled the night sky. The Homowo festivities had begun. The ban on loud noise had just been lifted. Grandma was going to be pissed when they returned home. Salom exchanged a look with his boyfriend Kwame, who was peering intently over his shoulder at the map, a steely glint shining in his eyes. He turned to his cousin Akosua. "You want to return after everything we've been through to find this place? Not a chance." "Salom, this is the one place Grandma had warned us to never visit. Remember when she told us the story of her twin sister who went into the lighthouse and never came out?" "Yes," Salom replied. "But have you thought that maybe she lied to us to get us to stay put and not wander around?" Akosua sighed. She knew how stubborn her cousin Salom was, but this was dangerous. She could feel it. She turned to Kwame, but Kwame looked away, silently agreeing with Salom. They had found the tattered brown map in their grandmother's belongings with the words Kweku Anansi written in bold red letters. They had followed the ancient map's clues for months, through dense forests, old forts, even crocodile-infested rivers. They had to be close. "Something just doesn't feel right," Akosua continued. "Or you're just scared," Salom replied. "You can go home if you want to," Kwame added, and Akosua chuckled. "If I go home, who's going to make sure you don't kill yourselves?" She took the map from Salom and stared at it. "And you're sure this is the exact location?" "Yes," Salom replied. Akosua pulled her blue sweater tighter as she eyed the ominous darkness pooling in the doorway. "I don't like this. What if he tries to trap us, or worse, steal our wisdom?" Her voice had become barely more than a whisper. "What wisdom?" Kwame asked. He poked Akosua's head and sighed. "There's nothing in there." "Idiot," Akosua yelled angrily. Squaring his shoulders, Salom mustered his bravest face. "We've come way too far to turn back now. Who knows if we'll ever get another chance?" He gestured to the map with its delicate lines and faded Adinkra symbols. This thing is our only hope of meeting the real Anansi. Are you willing to miss that? Imagine if we actually find him. Aren't you a bit afraid? Akosua asked. Afraid is not a word I have in my dictionary. Akosua turned to Kwame. This is how it starts, and before you know it, you are having dates in cemeteries, surrounded by ghosts. Kwame and Salom laughed. Akosua's shoulders slumped, and she shuffled her feet in the damp sand. After a moment, she gave a resigned sigh and a hesitant nod. Salom flashed her a reassuring grin. That's my cuz. Don't worry, I'll protect you. He puffed out his chest. Protect me with what? Akosua asked. Your skinny arms or your big mouth? Kwame burst into laughter, and Salom tackled him playfully. Akosua walked past them towards the door. Flashlights? She asked. Yes, Kwame replied. 2 in the bag. And what else? Did you follow the list? Yes, ma'am. There's a bottle of water, biscuits, and a pocket knife. Okay, she replied, leading the way as they walked closer to the lighthouse. Once they reached the doorway, they pushed open the heavy wooden door, and its rusted hinges groaned in protest. A musty, damp odor wafted out, carrying hints of mold, decaying wood, and the salty ocean air. They stepped over the threshold, their flickering flashlight revealing a cramped entryway with peeling wallpaper and scattered debris. Beautiful, Salom exclaimed. More like dead, Akosua retorted. She shuddered, her heart pounding in her ears. This place feels wrong. It's not that bad, Kwame replied. He led them into a derelict sitting room. Shredded curtains fluttered around shattered windows. Piles of old furniture were scattered everywhere, some pieces smashed and riddled with termites. A narrow hallway opened to their left, the floor thick with grime and cobwebs. Kwame swept the beam towards a stairwell at the far end, the steps ascending up into utter blackness. The path must be up there, he murmured, his voice barely audible over the groan of rusted metal and crashing waves. Hello? Salom's voice echoed down the corridor. Anansi, you here, spider dude? A loud bang made Akosua jump from fright. She turned around and found Kwame and Salom laughing. It's not funny, guys. It is, from a deafening boom suddenly rang through the building. Akosua jumped from fright again. Seriously, she yelled, throwing an old book at them. That's not us, Salom said. Another loud boom rang through the lighthouse, followed by lightning and thunder that rattled the rickety foundations. What followed was a sudden heavy rainfall that began pelting the sides of the lighthouse. Upstairs, Akosua said, and they began climbing the stairs. Their footsteps echoed hollowly as they climbed the spiral staircase. Up above, the lighthouse beacon continued its endless sweep across the shoreline, searching, watching, waiting. When they reached the last floor, they stopped by the glass window. Not far from where the window was, on the wall, written in red ink, were the lines, Faako asum ekatasaseso, na pon ebuemo sumnina edwanyeno, eho enodada afo, no edeneho esiahe, na onwene ensemone. What does it mean? Kwame asked. Salom and Akosua chuckled. What? I'm a Fanti and this is Tree, Kwame said to her. Fanti and Tree are basically the same, Akosua replied. It's not. It is. Quiet, you two, Salom exclaimed. Look. He pointed to the wall. The words had slowly begun to translate into English. Where darkness doth sweep upon the earth, and doors fade as shadows flee, the trickster hides from the light to spin tales of doom. Kwame read it out loud, his voice barely audible over the raging storm. The freaking wall just translated itself. We should go. This place is creepy as... Another rumble of thunder hit the lighthouse, shaking the old building. Kwame scrambled back towards the wall, and Salom looked at Akosua. Even he had to admit, the scary, rain-lashed lighthouse was worlds away from the Anansi tales they'd grown up with. Whatever waited for them at the top, they would face it together, or not at all. A piercing screech from the sea drowned out the thunder, a sound so ghastly and unnatural it stole their breath away. It wasn't the sea waves crashing, or whales. It was something infinitely more ancient and very much alive. The beam from the lighthouse swept across the Black Sea, its twin pillars of light cutting through the nighttime veil like searchlights scanning for unseen threats. Frozen in stunned silence, the three friends stared intently into the swirling darkness, ears straining for any sound amid the relentless crash of waves. Kwame's lips parted, about to vocalize the dread settling in his gut, when movement flickered at the very edge of the light's reach. Something massive skittered across the ocean's surface with unnatural speed. The beams swung uselessly, always a hair too late, as the creature wove an evasive path through the shadows. It seemed to almost sense the light's path and instinctively recoil, dodging away with preternatural agility. A shudder passed through Akosua as she glimpsed a fleeting silhouette. Salom opened his mouth, possibly to cry out, but the jagged shape abruptly ran directly towards the lighthouse. That snapped the three friends from their horrified trance. "Run!" Kwame's voice shattered the night as he bolted down the stairs, sneakers skidding over the floorboards. Akosua and Salom fled blindly down the spiral stairs behind him, the skittering sounds of that ungodly thing's onrushing approach echoing all around them. Kwame's heart thundered against his ribcage so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. What ungodly creature could make such an unholy screech? He didn't want to find out. Salom was behind, his trembling hands feeling out each step to keep from plunging headlong into the shadows. At last a dim rectangle of grey light appeared below, the entrance. Kwame flung himself against the door, and they tumbled outside, falling in a tangle of limbs onto the grass? Kwame blinked, sucking in gulps of air as his eyes readjusted to his dark surroundings. They weren't on the beach. Somehow, impossibly, they were now in the middle of a dark forest. Towering trunks with smooth amber bark soared high, their leaves filtering the dark clouds. The earth, dry and barren. "Where are we?" Akosua asked. She sat up slowly, looking around with a mixture of wonder and bewilderment. The sea was now a faint murmur. None of them had an answer. One second they were scrambling out of that lighthouse in a blind panic, the next, here. Kwame looked up and noticed the sky had neither moon nor stars. Salom climbed to his feet, brushing dirt off his t-shirt as he tentatively explored the clearing. "I've never seen trees like this before." Salom climbed to his feet, brushing dirt off his t-shirt as he tentatively explored the clearing. "I've never seen trees like these before." He touched one of the trees. Rather than rough bark, the surface was smooth, almost rubbery to the touch, and it looked like it had a face. He touched what looked like a nose and drew his hand back. "This is what happens when you don't listen to me," Akosua yelled. A strangled yelp came from Kwame. Guys?" He pointed a shaking finger upwards. Salom slowly lifted his gaze to follow his stare, and his breath caught in his throat. Sitting in one of the trees were webs, woven together into an unimaginably enormous nest, and there in the middle of the web, something gargantuan, furry and plump, moved. A rasping chuckle reverberated all around them, shaking the trees. "Well, well," rumbled an ancient gravelly voice from everywhere and nowhere. "As the elders say, it is the stubbornness of the child that has made the mother know all the elders in the village." Akosua and Kwame shrank against Salom, their faces draining of colour. Kwame's heart thudded rapidly as he managed to spit out the words. "Anansi?" Another low chuckle shook the floor before the reply came. "Who else, little ones? I've been waiting for you." He swung down from the tree, and as his feet touched earth, he transformed into a man. He was black as the earth, human from his legs to his neck. His head, however, was inhumanly big, eyes protruding. Akosua held onto the torchlight with all her might. She should have said no when the boys convinced her to come. She looked back at the door they had entered from. It had slowly begun to lose colour, as if fading away. "We mean you no harm," she finally uttered. "Oh, I know," Kweku Anansi replied. "What can you three do to Kweku Anansi?" Salome held on to Kwame's hands. "We just wanted to know if I was real. Now you know. Are you going to kill me like your ancestors did?" "We don't," Kwame began. "I have been here, alone for centuries. It gets boring when your companions are trees. It would be easy if trees were good audiences for a storyteller like me, but alas, they are not. Why don't we have a little story time?" "There's no need for a story. We will be on our way," Akosua began. "Silly," Kweku Anansi cut in. "I think it is time for another Anansism." "Sit," he commanded. And suddenly Akosua, Kwame, and Salome found themselves seated on the floor in front of Kweku Anansi. "Once upon a time," he began, "it was during a terrible drought season. People were dying of hunger, so the community came together to start a farm that would feed everyone for a long time. Everyone was forced to work, but I didn't join them. Kweku Anansi does not work. So I slept and enjoyed myself while the villagers worked because that's the right thing to do. And then when it was time for harvest, the villagers refused to give me some. So I devised one of my clever schemes. I pretended to be deathly ill, convincing my wife that when I died, I wanted to be buried on the farm with cooking supplies so I could make food in the afterlife. The foolish woman fell for it, and soon I was buried on the farm with all my needs. As soon as night fell, I came out and feasted on the juicy yams, plantains, and other vegetables growing abundantly around my grave. I would stuff myself full, then return to my tomb before dawn. Anansi the clever spider was well fed and happy, as he should be. But my gluttony did not go unnoticed. After spotting the dwindling crops, my infuriating villagers set a trap. Sure enough, that night when I emerged to hunt for food, I was startled by this strange man. I tried to get a response from him, calling him, but the man said nothing. You know how us spiders can get when angered. I just kept hitting it until I was completely stuck fast by the gum, immobilized from legs to head. By morning, the entire village found me in such a pitiful state, trapped to the gum figure I had mistaken for a real man. I'll never forget their faces when they realized the truth. They unleashed their fury upon me with scathing words and hearty blows. They punished me for being smart, and then they imprisoned me here. The three children sat in silence as Anansi finished weaving his story, his eyes glittering with mischief. And that, little ones, is how this mighty creature fell from grace, Kweku Anansi continued, his voice resonating all around them. Of course, I've taken a few creative liberties over the millennia. A good story is nothing without a little spice. After all, no one wants to know that I was killing children, too. He got up from the floor. That day, when they were burying me, I cried, calling Ntumy. I begged him to save me, but he ignored me. The humans, his latest creation, were better than me. You are better than me. Impossible. Kwame, Akosua, and Salome exchanged looks of terror. They were thoroughly creeped out by Kweku Anansi's looming presence and the fact that he had just told them he had been killing children. Ntumy trapped me here. He made sure I could never leave. He, however, said nothing about children entering. He looked at the faces of the terrified children and smiled. You did not find the map. I found you, just like I found your predecessors. He pointed to the trees around. My collection. He turned to Kwame, who had begun walking backwards slowly. What's the matter? He asked Kwame. You look like you've just been caught in someone else's web. He threw his head back and laughed at his own joke, his body jiggling grotesquely. Kwame looked up at him. Please, let us... That's as far as he got, before Kweku Anansi struck him with stunning speed. A thick streamer of silk lashed out from Kweku Anansi, pinning his arms to his sides in one fluid motion. Kwame! Salome and Akosua shrieked, but were choked off as another jet of webbing, caught Akosua in the face, plastering her mouth. She fell backwards, hands scrabbling at the suffocating strands as Anansi cackled with sadistic delight. A gout of webbing narrowly missed Salom as he dove behind a thick root. Kweku Anansi reared up further on his back legs, mandibles clicking wildly as more webbing sprayed out of him. I honestly cannot wait to tell your tales to the next unlucky fools who venture in here. Sticky strands lashed Kwame's legs as he twisted away from Anansi's relentless assault. More webbing splattered across his back, weighing him down. Kwame twisted in desperation, frantically brushing away the webs. Help! The trees suddenly began moving. Thick, gnarled vines snaked up from the earth to ensnare the trapped children. Akosua screamed as rough, woody vines wrapped themselves around her ankles, dragging her towards Kweku Anansi. Salom thrashed against the vines, panic glazing his eyes as he met Kwame's terrified gaze. Akosua's fingernails pulled desperately against the compact webbing, trying to tear it off. Twisting onto her back, she grabbed the only thing she could find, her flashlight, and turned it on directly in Kweku Anansi's face, ready to throw it at him. The brilliant light pierced the dappled shadows in a sweeping arc. Kweku Anansi recoiled with a shrill screech of agony, his gangly legs scrambling backwards, repulsed by the intense light. His face burned as if they had poured hot oil on him. Akosua seized the moment to yank futilely at the webbing plastering her limbs. After freeing herself, she ran towards Kwame and pulled him loose. "What happened?" Kwame asked. "Light," she replied. "He doesn't like light. It burns him." "The trickster hides from the light," Salom said. Kwame turned to him. "Huh." "The poem in the lighthouse. It said, he hides from the light to trap. In his story, he came out during the night to steal the food or kill the children. He only hunts in the dark." Kweku Anansi screeched again, and the three kids began to panic. "Hurry!" Salom shouted as he began to pull at the vines and leaves around him. They pulled him free and sprinted back towards the door. Vines and branches whipped around in a frenzied attempt to stop them, but they kept running. By the time they reached the door, only the handle was visible. Kwame pulled at it, but it wouldn't budge. "Shit, shit, shit!" Salom yelled. He joined Kwame and pulled, but it still wouldn't budge. They could hear Anansi approaching. Akosua pushed the boys from the way and flung herself at the door with all her strength. The veil broke and she fell through, Kwame and Salom following. They fell out of the door onto the beach, gasping for air as the lighthouse creaked above them. Kwame's chest heaved as he gulped down the salty ocean air in ragged gasps. Is everyone okay?" he managed between breaths, looking at Salom and Akosua with wild eyes. Salom nodded, rubbing a bump on his head, but otherwise unharmed. Akosua had burn marks on her hand. They helped her up and rushed home. They ran through the traffic, through the loud jubilations and drums, straight to Akosua and Salom's grandmother's house. Grandma was seated by the shrine, pouring libations. She looked up as the kids ran into the compound and walked up to them. "Where have you been, and why are you running?" she asked. "Nowhere, we were just by the beach," Salom replied. "How many times have I told you not to swim at night?" "We weren't swimming, Nana," Salom replied. "Where were you, Akosua?" she asked firmly. "We were at the beach, Grandma," Akosua replied. She sat beside the charcoal pot, pretending to warm herself, but the moment Grandma turned to face Salom, she threw the crumpled map into the fire. No one was ever going to find the map again. She got up, but Kwame pulled her back, pointing at the fire. The map was in there, but it wasn't burning. The brown paper lay amidst the flames untouched. Suddenly, the electricity went off in the whole town. "Lights off," Kwame said jokingly, but as he lifted his eyes to the moon and stars disappearing from the sky, he began to panic. "That door was a seal," he began, "to keep him from our world, and we broke it." They all turned to the lighthouse. The light beams had gone off. Colossal webs had begun to spread all around it. And then that screech, the sound they knew all too well, began to ring in the night sky. Somehow they knew their otherworldly tribulations were far from over. Kweku Anansi was coming for them. "Salom!" Kwame yelled, panic gripping him. "Say something!" Salom's eyes fluttered open, instantly filling with terror as he lifted a trembling finger to point behind them. Look! Dread flooded Kwame and Akosua as they turned to follow his stare. There, hanging by the lighthouse, crouched Kwiku Anansi. The three kids scrambled backwards in sheer horror as Kwiku Anansi ran towards them. Akosua's shoulders began to shake with sobs of fright. Just then, Grandma pushed them to her side. "What have you unleashed onto this world, children?" she queried. "Grandmother!" Akosua cried. "I told you not to go to that lighthouse," she shouted to the kids. She turned to Kwiku Anansi. "So, the legendary Anansi walks this world once more." Her voice took on a hard edge. "I should have known my grandchildren would be the pawns to set your webs of mischief loose again." Anansi reared back, his bulbous abdomen pulsing menacingly. "Your twin sister sends her regards," Kwiku Anansi said to Grandma, and Grandma tore off her scarf, revealing an intricately carved wooden spider figurine affixed to a necklace. "It's been exactly 80 years since you took her from me, Adja Anansi. I have been waiting for you. You may have immense power in your realm of stories and riddles," Grandma intoned, "but here you are bound by the rules and respects of Ntumy and my ancestors." She began chanting in an ancient Ghanaian dialect. The figurine grew searing hot in her palms as Anansi suddenly recoiled, twisting around in pain. Grandmother stood tall, chest heaving slightly from the exertion of subduing the legendary trickster with her ancestral powers. Suddenly, the ancient lighthouse flared back to life. The rotating lamps burned with an intensity that seemed to crackle with mystical energy. Kwiku Anansi's spider form immediately recoiled against the searing beams of light. He screamed in pain as his skin began to burn. Sure enough, the light became an irresistible vortex, pulling Kwiku Anansi back towards the lighthouse. Kwiku Anansi's spindly legs skittered frantically as he fought against the powerful force, but it was no use. With a hair-raising screech of fury and agony, Kwiku Anansi's body burst into flames, and he ran back towards the doorway, propelled by the blazing energy until he fell through the door, and it closed shut with a bang. As abruptly as the lighthouse had flared to life, the lamps dimmed. The children stared in stunned silence before turning to Akosua's grandmother with a mixture of awe and fear in their eyes. The old woman simply gave a grim nod, tucking the spider talisman safely back beneath her shawl. Straightening up, she fixed each child with a stare that bore straight into their souls. "I am disappointed in you three. For lying to me, you're going to weed the farm, no phones, no television, and no library." "I am disappointed in you three. For lying to me, you're going to weed the farm, no phones, no television, and no library. And that goes for you too, Kwame. Every morning, report to my house." "Yes, Nana," Kwame replied. The other two nodded soberly in vow. They had peered beyond the veil of make-believe into the ancient primordial power, and they silently promised to honor the wisdom that had saved them. As the pale moon peeked over the cliffs, Akosua, Salom, and Kwame exchanged a look of relief. The trickster spider had been put back in his place, at least for now.
So I used to equate being a trickster with just being a bit cheeky or playing pranks, but I think this has made me realise that sometimes tricks can be dark and their consequences pretty severe. And I think the layering of a semi-gothic setting here with jovial characters helps make this story resonate with readers, or in this case listeners, more. Benjamin Cyril Arthur is a prize-winning Ghanaian author of short stories. If you like this story, you may want to take a look at his recently published work, Those That Hunger for Warmth, which is in our Aphrodite collection. Described by the author himself as the story of a boy navigating the quiet ache of loneliness, the dangerous bloom of queer love, and the weight of being different in a world that demands silence. With the lingering spirit of Aphrodite guiding him, the story becomes a lyrical meditation on forbidden love, the courage to feel and the hunger to be seen, and loved for who you are, a human. Doesn't that just sound beautiful? Our next feature tells a story about the same character, but in a very different way. A folkloric tale from the Dagomba people in West Africa, this is an extract from our Gothic fantasy collection, African Myths and Tales. It's called How Anansi Became a Spider. This was narrated by S.A. Cadane.
There are many stories of Anansi across the continent of Africa. This one is from the Dagomba people in West Africa. How Anansi Became a Spider. A very long time there lived a king who had amongst his possessions a very magnificent ram, larger and taller than any other specimen in the entire country. The ram was more precious to him than anything else he owned, and he made it quite clear to his subjects that the animal must be allowed to roam wherever it chose and be allowed to eat as much food as it desired, even if the people themselves were forced to go hungry. If anyone should ever hit or injure the king's ram, that man should certainly die. Every citizen of the kingdom obeyed the king's orders without a great deal of complaint. But there was one among them, a wealthy farmer named Anansi, who was particularly proud of the crops he raised. Everyone suspected that he would not tolerate a visit from the king's ram, and they prayed amongst themselves that such an event might never happen. One day, however, when the rains had begun to fall and his crops were already as tall as his waist, Anansi went out to make a final inspection of his fields. He was very pleased with what he saw and was just about to return to his farmhouse when he noticed in the distance an area of land where the corn had been trampled underfoot and the young shoots eaten away. There, in the middle of the field, still munching away quite happily, stood the king's ram. Anansi was so furious he hurled a large pebble at the animal, intending only to frighten him away. But the stone hit the ram right between the eyes, and before he had quite realized what he had done, the animal lay dead at his feet. Anansi did not know what he should do. Like everybody else in the village, he was only too familiar with the king's orders and knew he would face certain death if his crime was discovered. He leaned back against a shea butter tree, wondering how to resolve the dreadful mess. Suddenly, a nut fell on his head from one of the branches above. Anansi picked it up and ate it. He liked the taste of it very much, and so he shook the tree until several more nuts fell to the ground. Then the most fantastic idea entered his head. He picked up the nuts and put them in his pocket and quickly lifted the ram and climbed the tree with him. As soon as he had tied the animal to a strong bough, he descended once more and headed off towards the house of his friend Kusambuli the Spider. Anansi found his friend at home, and the two sat down and began to chat. After a few moments, Anansi took one of the shea nuts from his pocket and handed it to his friend. "This nut has an excellent flavor," said Kusambuli, as he sat chomping on the ripe flesh. "Tell me, where did you come across such a fine crop?" Anansi promised to show the spider the exact spot and led him to the tree where the nuts were growing in large clusters. "You'll have to shake quite hard to loosen them," Anansi advised Kusambuli. "Don't be afraid, the trunk is a strong one." So the spider began shaking the tree violently, and as he did so, the dead ram fell to the ground. "Oh, my friend," cried Anansi at once, "what have you done? Look, the king's ram is laying at your feet and you have killed him." Kusambuli turned pale as a wave of panic swept over him. "There is only one thing you can do now," Anansi urged the spider. "Go and unburden your conscience at once. Tell the king precisely what has happened, and with any luck he will understand that the whole affair was a most unfortunate accident." Kusambuli thought that this was good advice, so he picked up the dead ram and set off to confess his crime, hoping the king would be in a good mood. The road towards the king's palace brought him past his own home, and the spider went indoors to bid a sad farewell to his wife and children, believing that he might never set eyes on them again. Anansi stood at the entrance while Kusambuli went into the back room and told his wife everything that had happened. She listened attentively to what he said and immediately saw that there was some trick involved. "I have never seen a ram climb a tree before, Kusambuli," she said to him. "Use your head. Anansi has something to do with this, and you are taking the blame for him. Hear me now and do exactly as I say." So she advised her husband that he must leave Anansi behind and pretend to go alone in search of the king. After he had gone some distance, she told him he was to rest and then return home and announce that all had turned out well in the end. The spider agreed to do this and asked Anansi if he would be so good as to look after his wife and children. His friend promised to watch over them faithfully, and the spider set off on his travels, winking at his wife as he moved away. Several hours later, Kusambuli returned to his home, smiling from ear to ear as he embraced his family. "Come and celebrate with us, Anansi," he cried excitedly. "I have been to see the king, and he was not at all angry with me. In fact, he said he had no use for a dead ram and insisted that I help myself to as much of the meat as I wanted." At this, Anansi became enraged and shouted out, "What? You have been given all that meat when it was I who took the trouble to kill that ram? I should have been given my fair share. You deserved none of it." Kusambuli and his wife now leaped upon Anansi and bound his hands and legs. Then they dragged him to the king's palace and reported to their ruler their whole unpleasant affair. Anansi squirmed on the floor and begged for the king's mercy, but the king could not control his fury as he raised his foot to kick Anansi as he lay on the ground. The king kicked so hard that Anansi broke into 1,000 pieces that scattered themselves all over the room. And that is how Anansi came to be such a small spider. And that is why you will find him in every corner of the house, awaiting the day when someone will put all the pieces together again.
Do you think that trickery, greed and cunning are always beaten by wisdom and a sense of what is truly right? Folklore and morality is so deeply entwined. I don't know about you, but whenever I hear a story like this, I always try to come up with a one-liner that summarises the overall lesson, so to speak. Maybe don't frame a spider for killing a goat is not quite right. Probably something about taking responsibility and a version of the liars always come to grief sentiment. August has been quite a mythology and folklore focused month for the Myth and Fiction podcast, so we hope you've enjoyed this little deviation from the trends of May, June and July. But of course there will be plenty more of our horror, fantasy and sci-fi short stories coming in September. We do have quite an exciting interview coming up for you next week, which quite neatly bridges folklore with horror.
Thanks so much for listening. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Flame Tree Myth and Fiction podcast. We look forward to the next one, and please remember to recommend it to your friends. Goodbye for now.